We do have a quorum, and it being shortly after 10 o'clock, I will call to order the April 15th Peninsula RPTO meeting. For those of you who are new, what I typically do at the beginning of the meeting is I introduce everyone because our meeting is available to be viewed afterwards. It's on our website. So I want the visiting public to know who everyone is. And I will simply read your names as I see them on my screen. So you can perhaps acknowledge so people know who I am mentioning. So I will start on my screen. I see Thera Black. Thera is the coordinator for the Peninsula RPTO. I am Beck Ashby. I chair the Peninsula RPTO and I represent the city of Port Orchard. Ed Coviello is also a PRTPO coordinator and he is an employee of Kitsap Transit. Dick Taylor is a commissioner with the Port of Shelton. Sarah Crouch is our fiscal agent representing Jefferson Transit. Nicole Guther, is that correct, Nicole, is with Jefferson Transit, and Tammy will be introducing her a little later. Ted Jackson is with the Port of Allen. David Fort represents Kitsap County. Tammy Rupert is a general manager of Jefferson Transit. Steve Rourke is the Olympic Region DOT administrator. He's our guest today and will be presenting. Jason Rowe is with Mason Transit. Ben Thomas, I believe it's his second meeting, and he is with the city of Port Townsend. Miranda Nash is also with Jefferson Transit, and she will be introduced a little later. Amy Asher is with Mason Transit. Lindy Schwarm Warren is the secretary for our group, and he represents the city of Port Angeles. Greg Brotherton, it's the first time we've met. It's nice to meet you, Greg. He is a Jefferson County commissioner. And then we have Leslie Schneider, who is a council person with the city of Bainbridge Island. Marty Allen is away from his chair. He is with the Skokomish tribe. John Worthington, I have not had the pleasure of meeting you, and I'm not sure who you represent, but welcome to our meeting. Deidre Peterson is a council person with the city of Shelton. Gary Anderson is a commissioner with the Port of Bremerton. Wendy Clark Getson is with the Jamestown Sklallam tribe. Chris Hartman represents the Port of Port Angeles. Dennis Engel is the representative from DOT's Olympic Region. Megan Euchre is with the city of Swim. And Megan, I understand your staff, you're not an elected, is that correct? Thank you. Vicki Grover is with the city of Bremerton. Rachel Anderson is a council person with the city of Sequim. Brendan Meyer is the representative from Clallam Transit. Susan Matthew, who we can't hear or see, is with the Lower Elwha tribe. And Randy Netherland is a Mason County Commissioner and Vice Chair of the RPTO. So with that, we will go ahead, and we all now know who everyone is. We will go ahead and ask for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Dick. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We will be voting on approval of the agenda. Is there anyone, there's been a motion and a second for approval. Is there anyone who would be voting against the motion? I will ask a second time if there's anyone who would be voting against the motion. Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented.
Could I clarify who seconded that, please? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I think it was David Fort.
Correct.
Thank you. I recognize the voice. And we have on our consent calendar, the only action item we have on that is the minutes from our February 18th meeting. again, is there anyone who would like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Dick.
Second, David Ford again.
Thank you. Our two go-to guys. Okay, there is a motion on the floor with a second to approve the minutes of the February 18th meeting as presented. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would like to vote against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved with unanimous consent. So now we will go on down to our feature today, and that would be Mr. Rourke. Sarah, would you like to introduce Steve and his presentation?
Sure. This is, for a lot of you, you may remember John Winans coming a year ago to talk with you about what's going on in the Olympic region. And as you might remember, John retired the end of 2021. And Steve is the new regional administrator. But if you're scratching your head thinking like, wait a second, I know him. Steve is coming back to the Olympic region in this role. So you may have worked with him previously. He stepped in first of the year, and he's just kind of getting his feet underneath him now. And it seemed like a really good time to invite him to sort of your annual visit with the regional administrator. And so with that, I'm really pleased to introduce Steve Rourke, regional administrator for WSDOT Olympic region. And Steve, I don't know if you have a presentation, but if you do, you are all set up to drive. And if not, just let folks know how you want to interact with them.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you, Sarah. And good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope to make, I'm not sure I can make every meeting, but hope to make as many meetings as I can here in the coming years. Thanks for inviting me. I jotted down a few things I thought would be interesting to share. I'm not sure what Mr. Winans shared here in the past, but you know, we have a longstanding relationship with the group here, and we appreciate all the interaction and dialogue we have on important transportation issues. And because we all know everything seems to run on the transportation system. It's so important to the communities we serve. So all the more reason to have dialogue like I hope we have today to talk about the important things we're working on. I see a lot of familiar faces on the screen, but some that aren't so familiar. So a little bit about me, as Claire mentioned, I'm taking over for John Winans. I've spent the last 3 months really getting up to speed, but I've been with the agency a long time, 32 years with the agency. I've had the opportunity to work in design and construction and maintenance. I spent the last 3 years as the agency's state design engineer. And then before coming back to the region, I'm excited to be back in the region. I like to say that regions here at WSDOT exist to deliver products and services to the communities we serve. So I'm excited to be back, and I think let's talk transportation. I jotted down 3 things that I thought we'd talk about. I don't have a presentation today. I'm hoping to say a few things that I think are important, and maybe we can have some good conversation about that. So 3 things. I wanted to talk budget. I think that's a pretty fresh topic right now. We of course have a new law, a supplemental budget. And we have the Move Ahead Washington package, which, there's some questions about that package and some uncertainty going forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Second thing, I wanted to highlight projects of interest, I think, to this group. Maybe some details there. And then the third thing, I thought I would talk about some of the emergency work we're doing. The peninsula got hit pretty hard. We are juggling a whole bunch of emergency work up on the peninsula. So I wanted to just share that piece. So hopefully something I say or cover will stimulate some good discussion. And I think it's always more interesting to have a good conversation and listen to myself talk. So let's talk budget. I'll start with the supplemental budget. It's, I would say it's fairly unremarkable. It did what it's supposed to do, at least from our perspective here at DOT. It made us whole in a lot of our capital and operating programs. On the capital side, two projects of note here on the peninsula. SR 305 corridor improvements received a modest increase. I think it's $3.5 million. So that brings the total investments available for the corridor there up from, I think, roughly 36, close to $40 million. And I'll talk more about that project here in a little bit. The SR3 freight corridor in the Belfair area also received a sizable increase, $12 million, bringing us, I think we have a total now of close to $79 million to invest in the new freight corridor. And so, I think that's probably all I have on the supplemental budget. There's some other details there that just kind of make us go along the operating programs. The big news that I think we're all looking into is the Move Ahead Washington package. A little unusual for a new revenue package to be approved in a short session. I know the rumors going in, we were hearing as we were going into session, is there might be a small revenue package. And it turned out to be a rather sizable revenue package. Unlike the last few packages we've had over the years, Connecting Washington, TPA, Nickel, Move Ahead Washington is not tied to a tax at the gas pump. It includes a variety of revenue sources. So I thought I would just touch on those revenue sources very briefly. I think we all know it's roughly $17 billion over 16 years. One interesting note is it does assume about $4 billion in federal funding from the IIJA over the next several years to get up to that number. But there's a whole suite of other investment or revenue sources, five plus billion from the climate emissions reduction account. There's roughly $2.5 billion from various fees, vehicle and driver related fee increases. There's about $4 billion from non-transportation, I guess what I would call non-transportation revenue sources. There's the one-time transfer from the general fund of $2 billion, which that's new. Close to $2 billion from the Public Work Trust Fund. I think that's an annual transfer over several years, roughly $60 million beginning in fiscal year 2024. I'm not sure how that's setting in with folks, but that's part of the package. And then there's other resources that benefit transportation, things like the sales tax exemption on projects and our ability to charge certain costs to the general fund. So, all that new revenue, it funds a bunch of stuff. It addresses the first thing it does, I think, from a DOT perspective, it addresses cost increases on our Connecting Washington program. And I mentioned a couple of these, 305 and Belfair Freight Corridor are examples of that. As a side note, I'll just say that cost increases, we're seeing inflation everywhere, right? The construction industry is no exception. We are seeing higher bids, in some cases, extremely higher bids. So it's going to be interesting to see what our costs are going forward. But clearly the budget has made a lot of our Connecting Washington program whole. So the interesting part about Move Ahead Washington, and I've been having this conversation with various groups with projects that are line items in Move Ahead Washington. The money, for a given project, the money is currently placed out in the future. I think we've probably all seen that. That's a challenge for us right now at DOT. We don't quite know. We can't spend the money until we're authorized to do so. And so that aging of the money has yet to be done. We're expecting that will get sorted out as we move into the next budget cycle. We submit our budget here at DOT in the August. We start gearing up now. We never stop planning for the budget, but we turn in August, September. And we're hoping that all gets sorted out in the next few months and we can all know the timing, if you will, of the various investments. It's also a workforce challenge for us here at WashDOT. It's how we do workforce projections to figure out how much work we will do in-house, how much work we'll outsource to consultants to help them. We rely heavily on the consulting industry to deliver our products and services. And so it's, we're kind of trying to use our crystal ball to figure out, how we're going to deliver all this work. Because it is a sizable amount of work, depending on when the funds are made. One other thing I think is important to mention on Move Ahead Washington is there is a revision to RCW 4724, which is city streets and state highways. It does require WashDOT to incorporate complete street investments into the scope of our highway improvement projects and preservation projects. They're over $500,000, and that requirement kicks in, I think, July 1st of 2022. So what that means is it has the potential to add scope to address investments for pedestrians and bicyclists and public transportation users. So that is a new requirement that comes in under Move Ahead in Washington. So I think that's my recap on revenue. So what does it fund specifically? 16-year package. If we look at the improvement program, I'll kind of talk about the improvement program and then the preservation program. $2.4 billion to fulfill the state's long-term obligation to address fish barriers. And we here in Olympic Region have roughly half of the fish barriers that are subject to the federal injunction, meaning that the barriers that need to be completed by 2030. We have a lot of them, and a lot of them are in Clallam and Jefferson and Kitsap and Mason counties. It's I won't try to sugarcoat this at all. We've got a lot of work to do in a relatively short period of time, and we are very aware of the, I'll just use the word construction fatigue that may result from open cutting, or in many cases, a lot of work zones coming to the Olympic Peninsula as we replace culverts that are blocking fish habitat. We're excited about the program. It's we're bringing on a lot of help from outside the agency, consultants, and internally to deliver the program. The $2.4 billion is, it pretty much fully funds the program. There's also $2.5 billion for highway improvements. I pulled out a list here of, I think, the improvement jobs that are of interest here. $74 million for Gorst area, $35 million for Belfair area widening, not to be confused with Freight Corridor. Roughly $30 million for the East US 101 East Simdar improvements. We have $18.5 million for SR 104 Kingston. I saw David Fort's on David gives me a thumbs up there. We finally get to get the realignment done down there. And then there's $8 million in the budget for the SR 305 Suquamish Way access road. I will note, back to my earlier comment, with the exception of the $8 for 305, we do not know the aging or the timing of those other investments yet. So that's kind of the big uncertainty on when we will be moving forward with Gorst and Belfair, East Simdars, and Kingston. So stay tuned. I'm sure you may know before we know when those will be. Okay, turning to preservation, our preservation program, Move Ahead Washington has an additional $1.5 billion for highway preservation over the next 16 years. You've probably heard a figure around $3 billion out there. It is a total of $3 billion, but a lot of those funds will go towards maintenance and planning, operations, and TIB and CRAB. Those are all included in that $3 billion. So we're seeing about $1.5 billion or $1.5 billion for highway preservation. And as I mentioned, I'll just reiterate the requirement for complete streets, evaluating complete street improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists and public transportation. That will extend to our preservation program, which means the funds for preservation will need to cover a broader range of activities. And just a note on preservation, we're excited, we're pleased that we have additional preservation funding because we need it. When I look around the region here in Olympic region, at the condition of our pavements and our bridges, our bridge decks, our painting of our steel structures, and our expansion joints in our bridges, we need more preservation money. And this is a start. I will say that I wish we would have received more. I guess that's an editorial comment on my part. This will help, but it certainly doesn't solve our preservation need. So more work, I think, to do in that area in the future. And then I wanted to mention our Z program. Z stands for local programs here in Olympic, or here in WashDOT speak. Most of the new investments in local programs capital are in the Move Ahead Washington package. So there's roughly $19 million for expansion of the bike ped safety grant program. There's I think it's around 130 million provided for additional local projects on the Move Ahead Washington list. So that's just a rough number. And then there's 290 million over 16 years for expansion of the Safe Routes to School grant program. And I understand there's about 11 million for this biennium included. And then about 5 million to make grant awards in the 21-23 biennium, which, to eliminate at-grade rail crossings. That money's available as well. So that is a kind of a high clip recap of budget. A lot of exciting news on the budget front. Still a lot of uncertainty on timing, unfortunately. I'll reiterate again what we're doing here at WashDOT. We're like a lot of I think probably a lot of your organizations. We're busy. We're very busy. So the workforce implications of this package that, we're really anxious to see the timing so that we can start pulling together and planning on how we're going to execute and deliver this program. So exciting nonetheless, but we certainly have some workforce challenges ahead of us to deliver. All right, so that's probably enough on budget. Let me move into projects. I wanted to just highlight a few projects in the region here. US 101 Elwha Bridge replacement. It's taken us a while to get this one across the finish line. We are very close. The last milestone was to start the clock, if you will, on our right-of-way agreement, I guess is the best way of putting it, with the National Park Service. And so we have that 4-month clock has started. So I don't see any obstacles at this point to advertising for construction bids of the Elwha Bridge this August. So that's a good news item. It's probably a 2-year project. We have some in-water work windows we need to hit with that project. But we'll plan to go to advertise the project in August. Turning to the 305 corridor, the improvement project out there, as I mentioned, it received a $3.5 million bump. That money is in the construction phase, and so we're expected to spend that in construction, which is good because between inflation, that project identified a lot of improvements, and we couldn't fund them all. And I'm not suggesting that we could add anything to the list, but certainly that $3.5 million helps us get those improvements we planned into the over the finish line. And 305 is a great example of partners working together to establish goals for a project and then set about identifying the right suite of improvements to invest our money. And so really pleased with how that project is going. And in terms of status, I believe Johnson Road is going to wrap up this summer. The next piece that will go to construction will be the Port Madison Addisville roundabout piece, and I think we're moving to Totten Road. And in all, I think we're planning to have the work substantially complete for the entire project in the 24-25. So some good news there. Turning to the SR3 freight corridor, we're currently working on the environmental assessment and advancing the design towards an early 2024 advertisement date. We've had some workforce challenges getting the corridor job moved along, but early 2024 looks like our credible advertisement date. And that project, of course, as we all know, will bring some much needed congestion relief to the Belfair area and some economic vitality as well. So great project. Let's see, US 101 East Swim Corridor improvements. Of course, it received $30.5 million in Move Ahead Washington. Dennis and his team, and Dennis is on the call here, has been doing great work with the public open house and getting input on the various alternatives for the project. Our next steps there, I think we're meeting with stakeholders again sometime later this month to present some of the scoring. And so we use the criteria from the purpose and needs statement. We're going to be kind of diving into what those how those alternatives score out. So that's kind of the next step there. But again, we've got to wait to see how the money's aged to figure out next steps in terms of how that 30.5 will be spent. Gorst area improvements, so $74 million. We've done a lot of work in Gorst. We did a planning study a couple of years ago. I think it was titled the SR16 corridor study, but it included Gorst up to or actually up to Loxie Edens, I believe. Our next steps there, the Gorst Coalition is doing great work identifying needs. I think we need to couple those needs together with the work we've done with the SR16 study, and leverage a working group to identify purpose, need, goals, and then leverage those to come up with the right set of investments that we want to advance with the money that we have. I had a note here. I don't know if this is going to stay. What did I do with this? Looks like the money's that $75 million. It's all in preliminary. There's 40 some million for preliminary engineering, and the balance of that, roughly 30 million, is for right of way. So we're a little, we're not envisioning, I think, any construction improvements at this time. And then Belfair area widening. That's a continuation of the work we did through Belfair a few years ago. Haven't started anything on that project. And then moving over to Kingston with the 104 realignment for ferry traffic, $18.5 million. A lot of work has been done there. I think we have a good plan in place that essentially swaps traffic from kind of the downtown area over on the First Street. Pretty excited to move that forward. We're hoping that's aged a little earlier in the 16 years, so we can get that done soon. We'll wait and see. And then the last project I wanted to note was the SR305 Suquamish Access Road. We received $8 million. We're not quite sure what the full scope of that project is yet. The interesting part is that the money is available this biennium, so we need to start moving quickly if we're gonna actually be able to spend that. So that was, I think those are the projects I had jotted down on my list. I'd be happy to talk about any other ones. But let me move into winter storms. So since November, I think November 15th was the day when we really got hit with storms here on the peninsula. And I just wanted to put into context for you some of the amount, the magnitude, I guess, of the incidents. We have 49 state routes here in Olympic Region. 28 of those state routes experienced water over the roadway. We actually had 140 water over the roadway incidents that caused short-term to long-term closures between November and January. We had 27 of our state routes here in the region impacted by downed trees and downed power lines. Probably the most impactful was Long Hood Canal. I think we had the canal there in the Hoodsport North area closed for, I believe it was close to 2 weeks. We had over 111 tree events on 27 different routes. We had 31 landslides on 10 separate state routes. And we ended up with 11 full closures on 6 of our state routes. I think at one point up in Clallam County, just about every state route was closed at one point in time. Highway 112 was particularly hit hard. We have Clallam Bay was a huge slide. Jim Creek was a huge slide as well. we finished up the work at Fallon Bay. We're now working to reopen 112 at Jim Creek. But we also have, while the road's not closed, we also have another significant erosion in the Fish River Valley there at Milepost 26 that we're working on. In all, we have emergency contracts or maintenance contracts. We have 3 in the Forks area. We have 8 separate sections of SR 112 that are either going to be a construction contract or we'll deal with our maintenance forces as we get to it. And we have a significant event going on SR 113 as well, Burnt Mountain. We have a failed culvert in a deep fill and water is backing up. If you drive by there, you might see a pump. We have a huge pump system out there that's moving the water until we can get in there and figure out how to repair that deep culvert. So a lot of work going on the emergency front. It's really pressing our Port Angeles office to keep up with their other work, but we're doing the best we can. And we hope to have everything restored by this summer. Out on 112, a lot of the work we're doing out there, we need to do some paving work out there. We need good weather to do some of that. So in the meantime, we're fixing a lot of erosion and sloughing areas. So a lot to do on that front. And I think I'll pause there. That is kind of my high clip overview of what's going on in the Olympic region and in the peninsula specifically. So what do we want to talk about?
Leslie.
Thank you. So I'm wondering what the impact of the Complete Streets is going to have. It sounded like you were saying that that's going to impact even projects that are have already been designated and or funded, and so now you would need to add funding to those projects potentially. So, I mean, I get the surface level of adding sort of bicycle ped infrastructure, but I'm just wondering if you had any more specifics about what that would mean for certain projects.
You know, I don't yet. It's still fairly fresh to us. It's clear to me that you know, for jobs that go after July, we have to consider complete street elements, which is a good thing. You know, we aspire to be a multimodal agency, but we don't know I guess the sideboards and the policy and the design policy that goes with that yet. So I don't have a lot of good information I can share as to what that actually means for our project development and our design processes. I can speculate and say that where there are, for example, I'll use Port Townsend. I think someone from Port Townsend was on the phone earlier. We had a paving project in Port Townsend a few years ago, and the city desired to add some bike amenities. And we ended up working closely. We wanted to do the same thing. We found a way to get it done. I think under this direction, I think the design policy would shift. So instead of having to do that kind of after the fact, it would be built in up front into the way we scope the project. Now you explain that very well. The job was a straight up just pave the roadway. And the city approached us and said, hey, we'd like to do some of the green bike boxes and things like that. And said, well, that's not our scope. That's what, that's how we say things sometimes here at DOT. But we worked together, we figured it out. I think what this legislation does is it gets us to scope our projects that way in the first place. We just don't have those. We don't have that all sorted out yet. So more to come. We will figure it out soon.
And you said something about July. So is it projects that are initiated after July?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Lindsay.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to speak a little bit to culvert removal. Are you able to hear me? Okay. I want to speak a little bit to culvert removal, which is a really important issue. I'm really glad that the state is honoring its treaty rights, or the tribe's treaty rights, by following through. Unfortunately, it took a court order for that to happen. With local governments, which many of us on this call are here representing local governments, we're very concerned about our obvious treaty rights violations through culverts. And we really hope that the state will help support that. And so as we publicly message the need for culvert removal, it's important to say that, you know, the court order that is currently in force is only addressing part of the problem, not the entire problem. And we all know what would happen if that had to go to court over county and local culverts. And so the watershed-based approach is really important there. And I know that that's a question more for the legislature in terms of getting that funding. But my hope is that we can all work together to make sure that that happens and that we're able to respect our treaty right obligations to the tribes. In Port Angeles, we are looking at 3 culvert removal projects coming up, one on Tumwater Creek, and which is kind of the east side of Port Angeles, kind of when you're leaving town on Highway 101. And then 2 on the east side of town, still within the urban growth area, but just outside the city limits, one on Ennis Creek and one on Lees Creek. And in the presentation by Watchdog engineers to the city, they mentioned that their projected models for traffic congestion based on those east side culverts would potentially be all the way toward Kitchen Dick Road, which is about halfway to Squim, maybe about 10 miles of potential congestion. I think it's an opportunity for us to look at ways to improve transportation demand management on the North Olympic Peninsula, because we also know that long term, we're looking at congestion between Port Angeles and Squim. And we've already widened that highway to 2 lanes. We know that that's not a long-term solution for dealing with congestion. It's a problem based on land use, which we haven't done well in Clallam County. But you know, we can't just keep building more lanes and expecting that to work. So my thought, and we did talk with the engineers briefly on this, but I wanted to bring this up in this group as well, is that this project might be an opportunity for us to consider or experiment or pilot with a high occupancy vehicle lane between Port Angeles and Squim, so that there's incentive for people to carpool or take the bus when doing that trip. And it's going to be a huge incentive. You could either sit in 10 miles of stop and go traffic or potentially move through it faster if there was a high occupancy vehicle lane. It's going to be 2 lanes up until, you know, the congestion, or up until the actual construction site. So it seems to me, not being a traffic engineer, not knowing the details, that there's potential to explore something like that. I think, you know, for Clallam Transit, we run a very frequent bus between Port Angeles and Squim, not frequent enough, but, you know, half hour through most of the day. And, you know, that bus is just going to be completely disrupted, and there's no real alternative for going around. You know, the old Olympic Highway, you know, kind of remerges before those construction sites. So it is really a need for finding a way for people to have an option. And if we could get the win-win of helping to get more bus riders or helping to get people thinking about carpooling, I think that could have long-term benefits beyond just that particular project. Thanks for thinking of that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Megan? Oh, you just have a thumbs up. Okay. Is there anyone else who has any questions or comments for Steve? I am not seeing any. Steve, we really appreciate your time this morning. The information you gave us was very valuable. In your presentation, you answered some of my questions, in that I was really concerned about the workforce. I know all workforces are stressed at the current time, and you have a lot on your plate. And I was wondering how you were possibly going to get all the work done. So I appreciate that as a major element in the work that you're doing. So with that, if there are no more questions, we will move on to our next agenda item. And Steve, you're welcome to stay for our meeting. And we also will not be offended if you have another place to be. So
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Sarah, I will put this over to you. And this is the first reading of our draft amendment for the UPWP for the next year.
Thank you, Beck. Yes, this is, for those of you who are new to the board, this is sort of our standard, or what we'll be doing is amending our work plan. So this is our budget and our work plan. It's a biennium, a 2-year plan, and this is the midpoint check-in. And in February, we talked with you all about, this process coming up. Since then, we met with the Technical Advisory Committee to talk about potential work program activities that the board might be able to identify in the second year of the biennium. Where you'll see in this, the budget shifted a little bit when we put this together a year ago. We were sort of speculating how the upcoming fiscal years would break out and what the workload would be like. So what I'm coming back to you with today are some updated budget numbers and then some ideas that were vetted through the Technical Advisory Committee for work program activities that the board might identify in the amendment package going forwards. And so as far as the budget itself goes, it's identified in there. It's like on page 5 of the UPWP. It's the same bottom line for the biennium, but what we are doing as we're picking up more work on the Human Services Transportation Plan, which is sort of separate outside of this UPWP, it means that we're not spending as much in the first year, so it creates opportunity to do some additional things in the second year of the biennium. So what you see is a shifting of budget both from year 1 to year 2. And then you see some shifting adjustments between the different task activities, just to reflect reality and as we, what the real world looks like as we've responded to things that have popped up. What we do think though is that there will be about $10,000 of work program capacity to tackle one or more small board directed activities in this next fiscal year. And so what you have in this agenda package is identifying, without getting into too much detail yet, but what the concepts are and kind of what they would do. And then in Appendix A is a little bit more detail and some cost range. And so the 4 activities are things that are probably should be familiar to you. And in fact, one of them is going to resonate real heavily with what Steve was just talking about. But there are 4 things that could be scaled depending upon what your priorities are when we come to you to scope them. One of them is to increase the resilience of the regional transportation system. And so in PRTPO's capacity, that would be about bringing stakeholders together and maybe assembling resources or sharing information to understand maybe what some specific issues or opportunities are that enhanced coordination could help on. So that's that one concept. And when it's time to decide, you all would figure out what the specific scope of that would be. So the first one is about resilience, economic resilience, or environmental resilience of the regional transportation system. The second potential planning activity that would be put forward in the amendment package as presented are strategies to increase rural intercity bus service in the region. And this is it came out of a conversation that the board had a little over a year ago in talking about the importance of more connections, long distance connections between our communities. We have some really good connections between, say, the West End and the ferries in Kitsap County that allow people to do that long distance trip efficiently. But it's harder, let's say, to if you wanted to go, say, from Port Angeles to Shelton. It becomes, it takes a little bit more coordination, or to go, I'm thinking of a story that Marty shared with us, say to go between the Skokomish tribe and other destinations further away out of Mason County. So what this would do would be to identify what strategies might make sense in the peninsula region to improve that. The third measure on there is more of a research, best practices, what's going on in other places type of a study that would look at innovations in rural transit service delivery. Again, we have a remarkable transit network in a highly rural region with agencies operating on shoestring budgets. But what this would do is go out and see what else is being done elsewhere in the country and bring that back to all of our transit partners public transportation, tribal transit, and maybe others as well, to get a bigger picture of what's going on in other places and just see if any of that it has value here. And then the fourth item that is listed there is something that's starting to bubble up a little bit, possibly out of the Human Services Transportation Plan. The term could be defined a little bit differently, but it's described here as a one-click, one-call coordination activities, and that would allow somebody with special mobility needs to not have to know who all the different transportation providers are, the different transit agencies and social providers, but to just have one number that they could call, and that would be a dispatch that would hook them into the right system based on what their needs are, the trip purpose and all of that. And what this would do is this would extend the work of the Human Services Transportation Plan and bring those stakeholders together to start scoping this and see if this makes sense for the region. So those are the four potential work program activities that came out of the Technical Advisory Committee discussion in March. The board would not be able to do all four of those, but you would decide at the time what would be the right priority to pursue. We won't, in all honesty, we just with your staffing levels, we would not have time to initiate anything until late this calendar year. So it'd probably be starting in like second quarter of the fiscal year. And this is all work that would have to be done by the end of June. So we would come back to you at that point and say, what are your priorities? What scale of effort do you want to put into this? By having it already identified in your UPWP in this way, it will expedite that whole process and let you be nimble in how you respond to those opportunities. So those are sort of the two big changes in this UPWP. One is a budget adjustment between year one and year two. And as a part of that budget adjustment is identifying, we think a minimum of 10,000. There might be a little bit more. We'll know after this fiscal year ends where we actually land on this. But as a part of that budget adjustment, right now we're penciling in about $10,000 for board-directed activities in that second half of the biennium. So I'm coming to you today to see if you have any questions, any changes that you want to make. Is there anything on this list of potential activities that doesn't belong there that we should take off? Is there anything missing? And any changes that you would have us make today, we will make to the UPWP. The next steps are we are going to send this to WashDOT as it's part of the formal process. We have a meeting scheduled with them, with the planning office in late April. I think it's April 26th, if I remember right. And they will offer comments and critiques on it. We'll make any final adjustments at that point. It will come back to you in June for final approval, and then it would go into effect on July 1. So with that, I would answer any questions that you might have, general or specific to the changes.
Wendy?
Hi, Thera. I was just looking at item number 5, or letter E, in Appendix A. That got moved from the unfunded list to the funded portion of the UPWP. Has it materially changed, and is there anything that you want to explain about that?
Actually, it's still on an unfunded, still in Appendix A as unfunded needs, and it's too big of an item to realistically for PRTPO to pick up. It's in there mostly because of some changes at the state level that are going to affect how local agencies do their comprehensive plans. And it looks like there will be a requirement coming up for at least at the county level and possibly at the regional level for there to be VMT reduction targets. All of this is legislation sort of in the making right now. It came out of legislative provisos this past session. So this is sort of trying to anticipate that there is going to be some need in the future to provide at a regional level an assessment of VMT reduction strategies and their consequent effects on greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where that comes from, is we're looking at the legislation that's going to affect you all as our local partners. And just and we're seeing like, oh, and there's going to be a regional role in here. So we're sort of putting that in there as a placeholder, but it's not funded. This is something that would be, we would maybe need to get additional funding from WashDOT to do this, or it's bigger than what we can tackle ourselves. Sorry about that.
So it is a sustainability work program for developing developing strategies across all mobility, not just transit.
Correct. It's all mobility, and it's really focused on BMT reduction. It looks like they're going to extend, but not just BMT reduction targets for urban counties, which is sort of already in the thinking, but WashDOT would like to see that extended to all counties in the state, including rural counties. And also there's interest in extending commute trip reduction. If it's not requirements, then opportunities. And all of that's also tied in with greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a sustainability measure, and regional supporting what the requirements are going to be coming down for locals.
Thank you.
I'm just going to make a couple of comments. And one is, we're not sure if we're even going to have $10,000 to put on unfunded work next year. As you know, we try to pick up something each year. We try to work very cost efficiently, but we also want to keep in mind that even though that E in Appendix A regarding strategies to reduce greenhouse gases, if we have it in our UPWP, and if there are other regions that do not use all of their money, DOT may come to us and say, can you use this extra money? And if we have it there, we may be able to add that to our budget. So some of these things seem like they're beyond our scope right now, and they probably are. But if we include them, we may be in a position to access some additional funds. So with that, are there any other questions or concerns about the UPWP? Let me see what's in the chat. Let's see if Susan has. Okay. With that, we will put this in a more formal format, send it to DOT. And again, your executive committee has a meeting scheduled April 26th with DOT to review it. And we will bring it back then in June for final approval. So that takes care of that item on our agenda. And now we will move down to a presentation and conversation with the North Olympic Peninsula Development Council. And Thera, I will allow you to introduce our presenters and also the subject matter. Sure.
Thank you. For about half of our members, you know who the North Olympic Development Council is. Multi-agency consortium working in Clallam and Jefferson counties on a wide range of issues. I believe, and Karen, you'll correct me, I believe that they are the Economic Development Administrator, the federally recognized EDA for that region, or Economic Development District. And they're working on a variety of things that a lot of you in those two counties are working on. But right now they're updating their climate action plan and developing sort of some strategies, updating their strategies and taking a look at the response that the partners up there are making. And as a part of their process, they're asking questions about regional transportation. And so we thought it was a good idea to invite them so that this is a conversation that, because it's really going to start touching on things as a region that go outside of Clallam and Jefferson counties in terms of opportunities for coordination and strategies to make a more resilient and a more environmentally lessen our impacts on the environment, in particular with greenhouse gas emissions. So we invited Karen Affeld, who is the executive director for the North Olympic Development Council. And we also, Mike Chang is also working with her from Cascadia Consulting, providing some really great support. They've had 2 workshops so far. And Karen, I'm not sure everything that you're going to bring to us today, but this is a really broad, diverse group of regional perspectives that hopefully you all will be able to give her some good insights and ask good questions that will then support their planning process. And for those of you who are very familiar with this, please jump in and as appropriate and help make those connections for the others who are not part of, not maybe familiar with NODC. So with that, Karen, you should be able to drive your presentation, and I'll turn it over to you to make any other introductions and background. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. So as Thera said, I'm Karen Affeld, and I'm the director of the North Olympic Development Council, and we are the Regional Economic Development District for Jefferson and Clallam counties, and we work on a variety of regional planning processes and infrastructure and economic development projects. Back in 2015, before I came to the organization, NODC led a process to develop the Climate Change Preparedness Report for the North Olympic Peninsula. And that document is available on our website if you're interested. It's noprcd.org. It's a great comprehensive document that identified vulnerabilities, talked about likely impacts, and had some great strategies, especially in the appendix or appendices. And a lot of good work has happened that as an outcome from that report. But one of the things that we found in the first few years following it was that local governments were having difficulty getting traction to make some of the changes that were called for or that were offered as opportunities in that report. And some of it was a capacity issue. And so we sought funding to do another process that was really going to be more focused on working with local governments, tribes, agencies, and federal agencies, including the national park and the state and the national forest, to really try to come to some consensus on what the priorities are for the region in terms of responding in a regional way. And then also to try to have some resources that could help local governments with their own individual approaches. So Mike, do you want to take us through the next slide? So building on the previous work, we're looking to really help the tribes, local governments, and agencies implement coordinated climate change adaptation and mitigation. So this is really much more about implementation. And the approach has been to facilitate a series of 3 region-wide strategy meetings to try to come to agreement on regional climate change priorities and find a set of actions that are things that will require some regional coordination and collaboration. So as we've gone through this process, we've identified some strategies that really are going to be much more local, some strategies that really require more state level action, and we're going to try to focus in more on the ones that are really requiring regional coordination and collaboration. We also have found that, that one of the things that is missing, particularly for rural communities, is tools to actually implement strategies around climate change adaptation and mitigation. So there are lots and lots of toolkits out there for how you do your climate action plan. But once you have your plan and you're starting to look towards implementation, what do you do? How do you go about it? So we're working with Cascadia and partners to try to gather examples, sample codes, sample processes, sample concepts that can really be put into action by local governments, even those that don't have a climate action plan. So if you just really want to think about you know, how do I change my development permitting process to take into account some of the likely impacts of climate change? You know, maybe you can go to this online toolkit and find a decision-making matrix, or a couple of examples of that. So that's a piece of it. And then finally, we wanted to provide technical assistance from Cascadia to 4 local governments to really help them move their planning processes and implementation processes forward. Next slide. So to date, we've had 2 of our 3 region-wide strategy meetings. The first one on February 18th, we really looked to review some of the prior work and then identify regional climate change priorities. And this was like a big brainstormed catch-all list. And then following that, we sent out, or Cascadia sent out, a consensus survey that looked to find, you know, where was the most agreement? What priorities did we have consensus on working towards? Then we had meeting 2 on April 1st and worked to refine those priorities and start developing some strategies. And that's where we're at now. We're actually just sending out another consensus survey to try to figure out where we have the greatest consensus among those strategies that were identified. And we'll have a 3rd meeting that's coming up on May 25th to finalize the strategies and metrics and really try to identify regional next steps. There may also be a 4th meeting that will bring together some funders who may be able to help fund this process or fund some of the strategies. But we're still working to determine whether we'll actually do that. Mike, do you want to take it from here?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Thera, for having Karen and I today. Before I dive in, just wanting to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Mike Chang. I'm a senior associate at Cascadia Consulting Group, and I definitely recognize some names and faces within this group as well. Cascadia also led the climate resiliency planning, or is still leading the climate resiliency planning process for the city of Port Angeles. And for myself, before joining Cascadia, I worked for the Makah tribe out in Nia Bay. So this is a region I'm definitely very familiar and close to my heart. So similar to what Karen said, we're also working on a climate action implementation toolkit, and really, again, focusing on the implementation aspects rather than the planning aspects. So within this toolkit, we have 3 general focus areas that we're really honing in on. One is about transportation and land use. The other one is related to energy and buildings and housing. And finally, there's a broad one that we're still trying to define and refine what we want to include within this toolkit, at least. But we know we're going to be having it about water and water systems and infrastructure. Again, we want to focus on implementation. So things such as code templates, what might be useful to include as new codes or regulations are passed, or if some codes are slated to be updated, providing educational materials. So understanding that as part of a lot of this effort, there's going to be outreach, education, engagement efforts. And so just developing materials that various jurisdictions can just use, copy, and tailor for their own communities. So just decreasing some of those thresholds in addressing some of the challenges or activation energies for jurisdictions to do. Other things we're also thinking about is including decision-making checklists or matrices and focusing on different audiences, from individuals and households to community groups to the government agencies or departments themselves. We're also thinking about highlighting a lot of different case studies, both from communities across the North Olympic Peninsula, as well as other communities that might have similar types of characteristics, whether they might be rural, isolated, having one road in and one road out, might be island communities, because we know if an earthquake or an extreme natural disaster happens, the Olympic Peninsula could be stranded as well. And so just identifying case studies of where some of these things have been implemented successfully. And finally, we're both creating a toolkit, both in a document form. So in case if people want to just print it out and access it and just easily reference that, we're also going to have this to be virtual and to be embedded on NODC's website. So we're really trying to make sure that this toolkit is accessible in any way possible as well. The next thing is Cascadia is also providing technical assistance to 4 local governments. So just as part of this process, NODC had an open application last fall to see which local governments needed assistance to support climate action, resiliency, and adaptation planning for their jurisdictions. We had 5 proposals that were submitted, and we are supporting 4 of them through this project. However, the 5th proposal that was submitted, Karen was very resourceful and gracious and was able to find additional funding to help support and implement that project as well, which is coordinating natural disaster response, emergency management, hazard mitigation, experts across the region to address and implement projects that will hopefully increase the ability for these jurisdictions to prepare for and respond to extreme events, especially extreme events that will be affected by climate change, such as flooding, landslides, and wildfires. The 4 governments we're supporting include Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe. So we're working with a few of their staff to do an update of their greenhouse gas inventory and beginning to develop strategies and actions to support the tribe in achieving to achieve carbon neutrality. In addition, we're supporting the city of Port Townsend to do an asset mapping and risk analysis to prepare key city assets against future sea level rise and flooding related to sea level rise. For the city of Port Angeles, they're currently in the final steps of their climate resiliency planning process. And so what we're going to come in is supporting a lot of stakeholder engagement with key implementation partners and develop a strategic implementation plan to accompany their climate resiliency plan. And finally, with Clallam County, we're working with them on developing strategies as well as updating their greenhouse gas inventory to support the development of a full climate action plan as well. So I wanted to just step back to the initial few slides that Karen was also covering about the regional meetings and the different types of priority areas that were emerging. And so in the very first meeting we actually had over 30 different priority areas that were initially identified in that initial brainstorming session. And through both an initial round of a prioritization exercise that we did with participants, as well as through a consensus survey approach, there were 8 priority areas that emerged. And from the 8 priority areas that emerged, 2 of them actually deal with transportation. So we're going to go a little bit in depth into some of the transportation focus areas with you all today. So the first one is the first transportation priority area we're focusing on is about adaptation and resiliency. So under this priority area, there were 4 initial goals that were identified at our second meeting that we had a few weeks ago. They are increasing the response capacity of the region if transportation routes are disrupted. It's fortifying vulnerable transit routes and corridors. Increasing the inter-community transportation accessibility. So between or across communities, making sure that transportation is accessible. And finally, within a community or intra-community, increasing the transportation accessibility to minimize the need to rely on single occupancy vehicles, for instance. Underneath each of these goals, you can also begin seeing some of the high-level strategies that participants were identifying. So, for instance, to increase the response capacity if routes are disrupted, we want to both increase redundancy of various transportation corridors, which is especially important for communities that might be reliant on a single route in and out. Identifying networks of roads that can be alternatives if a main route is disrupted, and also increasing the communication channels to drivers or other transit users if roads, highways are disrupted. To fortify vulnerable transit routes and corridors is building off of a lot of work that has been done regionally across the state to both identify roads that are vulnerable to future climate change impacts, and then to fortify those roads. To increase inter-community transportation, strategies such as increasing broadband, so that might minimize the need for some trips associated across communities. So that might mean you can do an e-doctor's appointment rather than going to the doctor's office. That might mean you can work from home twice a week rather than going to the office all 5 days a week. We also want to promote more public transit options between communities, and also just identifying various innovative ways to reduce the need for transportation. To address kind of the within community transportation issues and topics, both working with those local communities to minimize sprawl, so to increase the walkability of those communities, as well as other micro-transit options. So that could be buses or within a community carpool shares, things like that. That again just reduces the reliance on single occupancy vehicles. The other priority area that emerged was related to mitigation or greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation. So the first strategy or the first goal is reducing regional transportation emissions in an equitable way. And the second goal within this is decreasing emissions from tourists visiting the Olympic Peninsula as well. So to reduce emissions, transportation-related emissions in an equitable way, strategies that emerged include evaluating vehicles miles traveled across the region, so just understanding the current baseline, evaluating and tracking the number of electric vehicles that are purchased across the region, increasing alternative modes of transportation routes, which as you can see is also related to the prior focus area, increasing public transit options using alternative fuels, increasing EV charging capacity and availability, and also modifying land use policies to reduce the need for transportation. And as you can see from decreasing emissions related to tourist travel, so encouraging tourists to use public transit options, and also reducing emissions from airline travel to and from the North Olympic Peninsula. So finally, I also wanted to just contextualize the two transportation focus areas within the other focus areas that that have emerged throughout this planning process. And so we wanted to highlight that, knowing that oftentimes we create these priority areas, but these priority areas aren't naturally in silo together. So obviously how transportation and some of the strategies we might rely also affect some of these other priority areas as well. So for instance, if we're going to be relying on the electrification of the transportation sector, energy resiliency, redundancy, and independence will be a really important element to also support that strategy. Things related to land use, planning, shoreline management that can also lead to coastal flooding also affects roads that might be in coastal flood zones as well. But the other priority areas that have emerged throughout this process includes the water supply availability and water quality of the region, energy resiliency, redundancy, and independence, local food and agriculture, shoreline management, land use and planning, wildfires and wildfire smoke that comes in from other regions, and water infrastructure, specifically sewer and stormwater systems. So with that, kind of framing these priority areas, just identifying some of the next steps that we're currently doing. So we actually sent around a consensus survey sent to regional governments, tribes, and stakeholder groups. And we actually sent that out yesterday, so it is live and open. One thing we're iterating is that even though the survey is open to all who represent these groups, we are limiting kind of one consensus vote to one entity. So one of the things we are trying to manage is if there are multiple representatives voting on behalf of a single entity, and there is significant disagreement between those representatives, we'll be convening those reps together from that entity to try to identify a pathway of agreement to kind of represent their jurisdictional perspective on these priority areas. And again, the third regional meeting, which is scheduled for May 25th, the timing is still TBD. But we're going to be focusing on tangible next implementation steps for that. So again, really focusing on the implementation aspects of this process. And that will again tee the group up for this likely fourth meeting that will be happening, which will be talking about funding mechanisms to some of the prioritized strategies and actions. So with that, I'll just pause here and open it up for questions and discussion too. So thank you all for listening, having us and listening.
There, Lindsay.
Mike, thanks so much. It's really awesome to see the work that Cascadia is helping with across the peninsula and the planning region that we're a part of. I wanted to ask about the bullet around public transit. It seemed to suggest that alternative fuels in public transit and a robust public transit system were necessarily connected. And I feel like those are actually separate issues. I'm of the opinion that I'd rather have a bus every hour between Port Angeles and Forks running on fossil fuels than the current bus or less running on battery, but that might be fighting words there. But can you tease out kind of what that suggestion is and whether there's more intervention needed on it or people have other views on it?
Yeah, I can tee us up and then I might hand it over to Karen to elaborate on that. So just to address kind of your first question about whether alternative fuels is coupled with public transit, I think for this, because reliance on regional transit options, I think public transportation really dominated as like a mechanism to reduce regional emissions. And so from the discussion, that was how it was naturally paired. I think the example that came up is, I forgot which transit agency or district was focusing on transitioning some of its fleet to hydrogen fuels. And so that's why that was paired together. That being said, the process that we're currently having right now about releasing the consensus survey is to kind of, again, begin this teasing out process. So our role in this is just facilitating the conversation and just reflecting what was said. And so I think because the alternative fuel conversation happened within the context of public transportation, that was why it was paired together. That being said, I don't think it necessarily needs to be paired. And what's very likely going to happen is these higher level strategies and objectives are going to be continued to be refined ahead of the third regional meeting. So as you can see, we're closing the survey on May 13th with the meeting happening May 25th. So the 2 weeks in between the closing of the consensus survey and the third regional meeting is what our team are going to identify all of the comments and concerns that were raised, and we're going to do another round of refinement ahead of that third regional meeting to address those types of concerns. Karen, I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on any more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that both things will probably be included in and kind of are included in what's been discussed so far. One is the need for more and better public transit that will meet the needs of people in the most rural communities. as a way to, reduce vehicle miles traveled in individual vehicles. But then also, then the question arises, well, okay, and is there a concern around, wanting to use alternative fuels where possible, or pilot projects using alternative fuels as a way to reduce emissions of the public transit sector. So they don't necessarily have to, both things can happen. And I don't think that is content, that in any of the discussions that came up, and I was in that group, that it was contingent on alternative fuels.
Okay, I have a question, Karen. I know that your organization in Clallam and Jefferson County has a lot of same membership that we have. And I know that you have also additional membership besides that. What my question is the overlap of membership between this group and your group. Are there different representatives from our members that are on your group? I was wondering if this was the first time most of our members or our representatives had seen this presentation. And I also am going to put a couple of people who have removed their video, so I'm not sure if they've stepped away for a minute. But I know that Leslie City has been very engaged in climate information, and I was wondering if she had any input, and I would ask her to speak, and then Thera, we will call on you.
Thank you. I had to step away for a phone call just here, but I think I got most of the presentation. I guess the main thing I would offer is that we do have a climate action plan that it's been now almost 2 years, I think, since time flies. But we also have a climate action, an advisory committee that I serve as a liaison to. So, and then we just most recently just signed off on our sustainable transportation plan, and I would be very eager to sort of collaborate, go over, whatever is important on that. I guess one thing that's maybe not evident in any of what I just suggested above is that there's also a program, there's a ride-sharing app that's being developed with some Western Washington University folks. And I don't know enough about it, but I'm very motivated to find out more. So anyway, I think it'd be wonderful to be able to share information like this regionally. Does that help?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that our membership that this was valuable information and workable information, usable information for our group moving forward. Sarah?
Thanks. And Karen, thanks for coming. And just so for all of the board members to know, so NODC keeps PRTPO in the loop. And so unfortunately for scheduling reasons, I was not able to attend the two meetings that they had, but we do sort of pay attention. It's why we brought it to you. And Karen, the board has supported electric vehicle, to increase the EV readiness of the region, and they've approached it broader than just a public transportation thing. And I'm trying to remember when I completed that survey back, I think it was in February or so, or early March. And what you're just saying right now made me think of it. How does it look at, so greenhouse gas emissions as it relates to public transit? That's one set of topics there. And I think Lindsay's comments were really insightful. But can you tell us how other, like just the electrification of the transportation system fits in? There are some funding opportunities underway right now to do more rural electrification. I'm curious if you could just update us on how, just in general, electrification of the system sort of shows up as a priority for all the responses.
Yeah, and that was a priority as well, was increasing EV infrastructure throughout the region. And gosh, it's been at least 3 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago. NODC was the coordinator for a regional application for an EV charging loop around the peninsula. And that was not funded. And I think there's still quite a bit of interest in seeing that happen. You know, and one reason being the tourism emissions piece. You know, if we don't have the charging ability, you know, and people are coming in individual cars, then you know, we want to be as welcoming as we can, but then also making it possible for people to commute from our most rural areas using electric vehicles as a you know, if you don't have places to charge your vehicles when you get to your destination, the distances are long, and it's a real challenge. So that definitely has appeared as a priority, and it's something that we're following. I think that there are better organizations to take the lead on applications than NODC, but we're certainly you know, willing to continue to partner on that.
And I'll just quickly add, Karen, that there are that big grant that you applied for, that NODC applied for, has reopened, and there is I think there's a logical team going forward. So the board will hear more about that in the future.
Another question I have is the toolkit, once it's completed and is on your website, is that available for non-members?
Yes, yes. Yeah, our membership is a membership of local governments and organizations. So I think we currently have about 34 members. So we have local governments, tribes, agencies, and nonprofit organizations, and a few businesses as well, that are members of the organization. But our work is always for the region as a whole, and so there, you know, the intent of that is that it will be available to anyone, and that it may be useful even to rural communities beyond the peninsula, because it's just so hard to find things that are at the rural community scale.
So we appreciate that. Are there any more questions or comments for Karen or Mike? I know I very much appreciated the presentation, and thank you for joining us. It was very, very useful and informative for us.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And now, Thera, we will move on down to our Human Services Transportation Plan update.
Sure. So this is every meeting we are coming to you with something on this update. This is a state mandated planning requirement that's focused on a very specific aspect of transportation, which is meeting the mobility needs of people who don't drive. And so they need to meet all the same daily needs as the rest of us. And so this is how the transportation system does or does not meet their needs. We're really focused on the mobility needs of seniors, people with disabilities, people with low income. And then the board also said, you know, tribal communities are really important and have some unique, challenging mobility issues that we want to look at. And then we're also keeping an eye out for things that might be unique to veterans populations and populations that don't speak English. So it's a pretty focused effort. And over the last few meetings, we've talked with you about service providers and about how we're going to engage the public. And that has now started. That engagement is starting to get underway. And we're updating the 2019 plan, and we're using the engagement process to go back and revalidate our understanding of the baseline conditions. So what are the needs? You know, have those needs for mobility changed as a result of the pandemic or other conditions that might be out there? Are the gaps or the problems or the barriers, or does our 2019 understanding of those, is that still sufficient, or have new opportunities or new issues cropped up? And again, pandemic related, there could be some. I've already heard of several. And then what are some strategies that can address those? And so again, we're starting from the 2019 plan. We're working with service providers and then through them, the public, to like it's to vet, to update, to revalidate those. And then we will be coming back to you in June to talk about how do we prioritize these strategies? How do we think about these priorities or these strategies in terms of their priority for the Peninsula region? And the reason why that matters is that that ultimately influences consolidated grants priorities later. So this is a step in a process that ultimately will affect project funding by some of our transportation partners. What you have in your agenda packet is a synthesis of the issues, the mobility needs, the issues and problems as we understood them coming out of the 2019 plan. So we're trying to freshen up the language and make it easier, more readable, easier for people to understand and work with. We are going to move out now into our engagement process very shortly with these. We have a meeting scheduled next week on April 20th with service providers across the region. And again, these are transit agencies, tribal transit agencies, and our nonprofit and for-profit service providers, as well as any organizations that might do that kind of ride matching, like Catholic Community Services of Southwest Washington, sort of helps put people with some of the ride resources that are out there. We're going to get as many of them together as we can when what we think might be about the first that we can find record of meeting like across the region, of getting people, regardless of the type of organization they are, where they're located, bring them together and start sharing ideas and building sort of a common understanding, and to also hopefully start building some new relationships and open up doors for new partnership opportunities and coordination opportunities. We will also be going to the same group, because we know not everybody can attend, virtual meetings. We'll also be reaching out to them individually as well as with survey tools. As we discussed last month, our engagement at this point is primarily focused on the service providers, because they work with such an array of members of the public. And then when we are ready to start going out to the general public, we're going to actually work through these organizations, because they can connect us with their clients much faster, and help us get a more targeted engagement from the public. But what in this staff memo, you can sort of see how we're looking at this. Here are the needs that what we think we understand, sort of the basic mobility needs of our public, regardless of age or ability or income. And then the barriers that they face. And we're trying very hard to be mode neutral. This is not, we understand that people would like to have more rural transit, but there's only so much money. And so that's why it's so important to make sure that all the different pieces of this network work together, because transit's gonna be most effective providing certain kinds of services. Our nonprofits and our tribal transit partners are going to be more effective providing other kinds of services. And it's really how they all come together. That's what this is focused on, is where they intersect and how well they meet the needs or don't meet the needs of the vulnerable members of our community. So I think every month I want to keep you updated and get any input or questions that you have on this, any feedback that you have, so that as much as possible, these are your constituents that we're talking about. This is a segment of your constituency, and you have better insights, than I'm going to have as the PRTPO coordinator. So any questions that you can raise now, or insights, or things that maybe we might not have thought about, is really helpful to us, so that when we come back to you in August with a draft plan, which is what we need to do in order to meet the WSDOT deadlines for this, that we're coming to you with as solid and complete a draft plan as we can. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, or take any ideas or suggestions, and either about the material today, or just about the Human Services Transportation Plan in general, what it's about. You only do it every 4 years. And so for a lot of you, this is going to be a new experience, and happy to answer any broader questions as well.
I'm just going to add a couple of comments, Sarah. This is particularly for our new members, in that the Human Services Transportation Plan is our primary work focus this year. And it is the first time that this group has updated one of our plans significantly since we moved away from the Department of Transportation being our lead planning agency. So this is really our first effort, and we want to do a very thorough job as efficiently as possible with this. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the consolidated grant process is funding to support the human services transportation needs of the community. It is the one area that Kitsap jurisdictions, Kitsap nonprofits, tribes participates with through the RTPO. All of the rest of our, the Kitsap jurisdictional funding comes through the Puget Sound Regional Coordinating Council, and we're the only county in the state that belongs to two groups. But this particular, the consolidated grant funding is the one item that the Kitsap entities use through the RTPO. So you may want to be cognizant of that and make sure the nonprofits and the service providers in your community are engaged in the process with us. So that's what I wanted to say to it. Are there any other questions or comments about the process or what we're actually, or the upcoming meeting? We're welcome to field questions now, and we're very happy if questions pop up later for you to contact Thera. You notice I didn't include myself. You can contact Thera. So.
We'll be back to you next month. Like I said, we'll keep you updated every month since we're doing this in such a compressed time frame.
Right, so, and Marty has his hand raised. So, Marty?
Yes, I had a question. I was emailing there about this because our clinic provides rides for patients that go to doctor's appointments and things like that. And so we got the guy that does the head of that program. I got him contacted with Sarah for the update, but I had a question about in the update, when we do this update, what kind of things would help our tribe to, benefit more from this program, or funding and things like that? Like, what in the update, what kind of things would help us, to get more funding if we need it or whatever?
Well, Marty, we're hoping to flesh that out with you all over the next couple of months. I think one of the things that I see is that there isn't a whole lot of coordination between some of the other like everybody's kind of doing their thing, but there's not a whole lot of coordination between, say, like the nonprofit providers and maybe the tribal transit providers. I'm saying this Skokomish, and we do have a new human services transportation provider in Mason County. And so one of the things I think might come out of this is just making some connections, and then maybe the funding ask ends up being a connector shuttle or support for a volunteer driver program or something like that. So we're hoping, one of the things we're hoping is by having all these different entities around the table together, that we'll be able to like say the Skokomish will be able to learn from, say, like what the Lower Elwha Klallam are doing, or the Jamestown Sklallam, or and me personally, I'm kind of curious if there's some unique opportunities for our tribal transit partners that maybe our public transit and nonprofits aren't really eligible for. So this is very much a learning process, and I don't really have the answers yet, but those are exactly the kind of things we want to get at in this, Marty, to figure out what are those specific things that would help individual entities better meet the mobility needs of their populations or their clients that they're serving.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I kind of think that it's kind of limited, it's only for people that have doctor's appointments. There's people out here that don't have vehicles and, they could use a ride to get groceries or something.
Yeah.
If they, I don't know, some people use the bus, but the bus only runs like 2 times a day. So, and it's
Yeah.
only specific times, they have to wait for quite a while to catch the next bus to come back home or whatever. So I don't know. I just think there's a lot of, there's a lot of needs and not as much help as the needs are,
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see. That's exactly the kind of information we need, Marty, so that we can figure out what those strategies are. So I really appreciate your willingness to participate and bring Perry into the process.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and we'll figure out what's a good opportunity in the future going forwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Marty's questions are exactly what we're working on. What services are we not providing or are not available, and how can we make those available? So with that, again, if you have any questions or comments, please contact Sarah. She's actively engaged in this. And now we'll move down to our next agenda item, which is a discussion or a update on our fiscal agent. And I'm looking at Tammy and her video is off. I don't know whether she stepped away or not, or if I'm going to have to call on Sarah. But at our last meeting in February, Tammy Rupert announced her retirement from Jefferson Transit, and we were all very excited for her new adventures, but we were also know we're going to miss her and her leadership with the RTPO. Since Tammy let us know that, we also found out that Sarah Crouch, the finance director of Jefferson Transit, is also going into a semi-retirement and will soon be living in North Carolina. So there have been significant administrative changes at Jefferson Transit. They are our physical agent, and we're not, at this point, we do not believe there's going to be any interruption with their service as our physical agent, but that is a possibility. And I wanted to allow Tammy an opportunity to introduce Nicole and Miranda and give us a little update on what's going on at Jefferson Transit and their position as our fiscal agent.
Hello, everyone, and goodbye. Today is my last official working day. Sarah's got a little bit more time left, and I am going to be retiring. And this past month, the authority board went through a very intensive process and identified Nicole Gauthier as our new interim general manager. And Miranda Nash has been appointed as an interim finance director or manager and been working closely with Sarah Crouch to learn the ins and outs of finance at Jefferson Transit. We do believe that as physical agent, we will be able to maintain and continue to do that for the RTPO. However, the two interims are, in an interim state, and things do change. So, but at this point, we met with Beck yesterday and had a very nice long meeting about where we're at and how things are progressing at Jefferson Transit. Sarah will be gone May 4th. May the 4th be with you. That will be her last day with Jefferson Transit, and Miranda will be stepping in and has given us some confidence that she's going to be able to maintain the status quo for the RTPO. Sarah, did you want to add anything about your adventures?
Nothing about my adventure. I do want to say that Miranda is wicked smart, and she is going to do an awesome job for PRTPO. And I will miss everybody here. I'll miss seeing your faces every other month. And thank you for this opportunity.
And what an exciting direction that we're looking at. I was really excited to hear, and I'm pretty sure that Nicole and Miranda are pretty excited to hear about a lot of excitement around public transportation in the future. So it's really exciting that the state and the federal government, they're recognizing that it's, public transportation and all transportation, is the wave of the future. It is the answer. It's one of the answers, but I think it's a pretty big answer to getting those single occupancy vehicles off the road, to extending the useful life of our roads. And so I'm very excited for where you all are headed in the future.
So that was an update that we wanted to give everyone. Again, we don't anticipate any disruption with our fiscal agent, and we can't acknowledge Sarah and Tammy enough for stepping up with Jefferson Transit when we originally removed ourselves from the Department of Transportation and moved to Kitsap Transit as our lead planning agency, and Jefferson Transit at that time stepped up to be our fiscal agent, and Sarah had to create our financial system from the ground up. And I went up yesterday and saw the work that Sarah has done, and it's very thorough and it's very turnkey. So anyway, we can't express enough appreciation to them for the work they have done, which leads us directly into our next agenda item, which is RTPO membership recognition. And we wanted to recognize Sarah and Tammy for the work they have done the last several years. It's been outstanding. We have another gentleman who this is his last meeting with the RTPO that we wanted to recognize, and that is Dennis Engel. For those of you who are new to the RPTO, when the RTPO was founded in 1990, the Olympic Region Department of Transportation was our lead planning agency. And they did all of the work. They were our lead planning agency. They were our fiscal agent. They did all of our annual reports. They created all of our plans, helped create all of our plans. And Dennis took over the leadership role in that particular department about 9 years ago. So he has been instrumental. He and his staff did all of the work that we see Sarah and Ed and Sarah do at this point. He is a remarkable person. I can't thank him enough. I'm not sure that the RPTO can have a meeting without Dennis present. He is just a remarkable man. I would say that he's very responsive, always has been, to our needs. He's been very understanding. He's been informative for us and always present. But most of us have worked with him for a long time, and I wanted to give our members an opportunity, because we're not meeting in person, and so we can't have cookies and coffee and all sit around and share Dennis stories. So we have to do this via Zoom, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to acknowledge the work that Dennis has done for our group. So yes, big claps. And is there anyone who would like to speak? Tell us a Dennis story. I'm not seeing anyone. As you know, those of you who have been around for a while, usually when I do the introductions at the beginning of the meeting, I always introduce Dennis as the troublemaker. But if you remember in the presentation that Mr. Rourke did earlier, he talked about Highway 3, the Gorst interchange, and the difficulty with the Gorst interchange. And what I will say to that is, here several years ago, the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council was trying to do a study, and the state was trying to do a study. And it was actually Dennis who stepped up and created that Highway 16 and Highway 3 study. He put that together, the work KRCC was doing, and the work you're seeing now, the movement forward with the Gorst interchange, the foundation of that was because of the leadership of Dennis Engel. So Dennis, the entire region has a lot to be thankful for. So we're grateful you've been part of the work we're doing. And I see Wendy has raised her hand.
Well, goodbye, Dennis. I just wanted to thank you for so many years of working with you and the amazing way that you have streamlined so many issues for us, whether it's the transition process, but also just distributing funds to get work done, how we go about our planning corridor studies and staying on track. And I really appreciate that you like roundabouts. I think that's been a great support to the region.
Is there anyone else that would like to acknowledge Dennis? Many of you are earlier. Okay, David, do you want to say anything?
Oh, no, I was just giving him a thumbs up. I mean, Dennis has always been great as part of that. Actually, even answered emails while we're on this meeting that I sent to him. So, and we look forward to seeing your replacement when that person is named.
Yeah. And again, as I indicated, he's always responsive and always present. So Dennis, thank you. We will miss all of the trouble that you cause us over time. And we will then move down to our next agenda. Yes?
Beck, this is Marty.
Okay.
I just want to say a quick thank you to Dennis too. I talk to him at the meetings once in a while, and it's good to know him and thank him for all the work he's done for RTPO and everything. Is always knowledgeable on everything, and every time we, like we had a discussion about something, trying to figure out, he'd always jump in and, show us the ropes. So thank him and for everything.
Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, Marty. Our next agenda item is discussing potential in-person board meetings. We had talked about that briefly. Sarah, do you have anything in particular that we wanted to talk about? I think what we were going
to, what we wanted to find out is we know that organizations are starting to meet again in person. For us to move to an in-person meeting, we would need to get a little bit of a head start. And so we're curious if the board, we're probably envisioning maybe one in-person meeting between now and the end of the year, because we're planning on mostly continuing to work remotely. So if we were to meet in person, it seems like maybe either June, August, or October would be the better months, assuming we know what the future looks like. So I think we're just sort of trying to get a sense of the policymakers, if you all, when would be a better time in your minds? Would it be a summer meeting or in the fall? What you might think about that.
Lindsay?
I'll just share what City of Port Angeles decided with our meetings, because one of the things that I heard our health officer say is that now is the time to create resilience in our systems, because COVID isn't over, but we have a little bit of a lull. We decided that when the COVID rate in Clallam County is below moderate, we would have a hybrid and in-person meeting. But if the rate is moderate or higher, then we would just have a virtual meeting. And so that's what we're doing. We did have a hybrid meeting, in person and virtual, because when we announced that meeting, the rate had fallen below moderate. It's now back in the moderate range. So most likely our meeting this coming Tuesday is switching back to just virtual. So that's our responsive system, and I think it makes sense based on the fluctuations of the COVID infection rate. And the risk, it's not just the infection rate, it's the risk based on levels of vaccination and everything else. So this is based on a health officer's risk dial that's on the website. For us, I would suggest something similar if we want to go there, but also as an organization that is spread out over probably 4 hours of drive time. It also makes a lot of sense for us to stay virtual. But when we come together, let's capitalize on it, and let's do it for something like a site visit or a field trip, or something where it really makes sense to come together in person and really see a project location. And with that in mind, the summer is definitely an easier time just based on the weather, wildfire smoke as an uncertainty, of course. But that would be my suggestion, would be summer. And I apologize for speaking and then ditching, but I do have to leave in a couple of minutes for another meeting.
Yes, and we are getting near our allotted time, and we have to allow time for public comment. My concerns as far as in-person meetings had nothing to do with the health risk of COVID. It had to do with the transportation time and the attendance. Because we do have robust attendance when we're meeting via Zoom. So we will work on that. And for those of you who are a little newer, we used to, our June meeting, we did take a road trip to one of the various counties and looked at their projects. So those are things we can think about. And what I'm seeing is a lot of your jurisdictions are going to hybrid. We will keep you posted and perhaps put out a survey as we do more work on this particular element of our concern. So with that, I will, if there's anyone in the public who wishes to provide comment to us, now would be the appropriate time. Mr. Worthington.
Oh, John,
you're muted, Mr. Worthington.
I'm going to address the WASDOT guy who's not here anymore, and I'll address you guys too on the same issue. The Dungeness Bridge project. I opposed it, and I oppose it because the natural floodplain that you're trying to restore just going to end up bare in the summertime. It may not be this summer, may not be next summer, but you're going to end up with a dry gravel bed. We just spent multi-millions of dollars to jump over a dry gravel bed. And if you wonder where your fish culvert money goes, well, just look at that. You got the Washington State Department of Ecology Floodplains Design Program, basically bogarting the fish culvert money. And you spent all that money to develop a floodplain, and it's just going to go dry in the summertime. And you've already convinced me when you took out the dams that you need that flow for the sediment to keep the spits and the waterfronts maintained. So I bought that, but now you're coming in with this, no, flow doesn't matter anymore. We got to have all this floodplain. And in the study that they used to come up with all this, they left out the cedar, they left out the Columbia, they left out the green. Well, they got water in the summertime, so you can't jump across the Cedar River during the middle of summer. They're not handing out water bottles because there's a drought. So you got caught up in that and just sucked our money for the fish culverts, and they were wrong. And so now I'm going to move on to the point of order, basically, is I don't really want ICLEI members on the executive board because of the charter. I don't think it's possible to serve an international sphere of government, build and serve, and then represent your community here locally. I just don't think it's possible. I don't mind them in another branch of your organization, but you're either here to build for the community here, not an international sphere of government. Too many of the folks here belong to the ICLEI. That leads me to ClearPath and Cascadia. That guy's gone too. Well, that's ICLEI stuff. That's world economy stuff, building capacity for the world. So when they have this ClearPath, nobody wants to find out where we're getting our stuff. What percentage, how much of our stuff are we getting from the world economy? Seattle doesn't want to know. Seattle found out. Seattle realized they're getting 70-some% of their stuff from 6,000 or 2,000, 6,000 miles away. So ClearPath doesn't give you a proper climate change, your comprehensive, all of your plans just lean on the world economy and lean on the roads. And because you don't track, go into a store and track how many lane miles, or importantly, how many nautical miles this stuff has to travel to get to us, you don't include it. So you have this basically false vision in your plans that basically don't account for the emissions from all the ships that are floating in the harbor and the 2 weeks that it takes to get here. The jet stream brings that all to us. Nowhere in ClearPath does it tell you all of this. You're not gonna get what you're looking for. You're gonna get what the world economy is looking for, where they pin us down on our drive to work and our drive to Walmart, but you're just gonna be creating more emissions than you're solving. And you need to beef up your growth management responsibility, and you're gonna have to comply with RCW 4780026, which is to centralize your economic activity. Seattle doesn't do it, Everett doesn't do it, Tacoma doesn't do it, because it's hard to give the transit folks and the transit-oriented development folks what they need, which is basically developing over agriculture and manufacturing. They don't want to admit it. So you're not really saving a whale, salmon, and frog. You're basically catering to apple carts and making money. And it's tough to hear. And I know people hate me worse than Monday hates Friday. But the fact of the matter is, not just you guys, but all of our MPOs and NGOs, they're off the mark. They're off the mark. They're not tracking how much stuff we're getting. They're not helping us address the water flow problems in the summer. You could, if you wanted to, basically, if you're going to go natural and you're not going to stop them from catching shorties, all the log jams and stuff in the world and all the floodplains in the world aren't going to help you if in the summertime they're just going to go dry and you could jump across the creek. So that's where we're at now. And I'm going to continue on until you finally go into the stores and track the lane miles and nautical miles and bring in the real sticker price of the world economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And now we're a little bit past our allotted time, but I will allow or open it if any of our member organizations wants to provide any updates or good of the order. Okay, seeing none, I'm assuming that we all have a lot of other things to do. So I thank you for your attendance today. I thank you for your participation, and we will see you again in June. And that June meeting will be a virtual meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.